Hello students, in Unit 12.4 we are going to introduce the three main theories of emotion. But before we do, let's first talk about how physiological states can lead and impact and direct emotion, guide emotion. So you should be able to recall what all the functions of these parts are, like the thalamus, the visual cortex, the amygdala. What are the functions of those parts, and how do these parts lead us, or can lead us, to the sympathetic nervous system? Remember that we have a sympathetic state and a parasympathetic state. The sympathetic state is where we are aroused to potential dangers. We have elevated heart rates, elevated respiratory rate. We start to sweat. Our digestion shuts down. But when we're in the parasympathetic state, we're calm. Our breathing is slowed down. We're relaxed. We're digesting normally. How might this influence or impact our emotion, do you think? Before we start getting into the main three theories of emotion, you have to understand that these are going to be pretty complex. You have to memorize and comprehend the steps and the stages for processing emotion in these theories. Okay? So the first theory that we'll discuss is the James Lange theory of emotion. And this is, according to this theory, the experience of emotion is awareness of physiological responses to emotion-arousing stimuli. Notice the emphasis is on the awareness of physiological responses. We have to be aware of our physiological state first before we're aware of our emotion. So, for instance, let's say we see an oncoming car, and that's the perception of our stimulus is this oncoming car. Perception, stimulus, oncoming car. We see the car. It's coming right at us as we're driving. So as a result, our heart starts to pound, and this is our arousal. Oh my goodness, I cannot do this. Okay. So our heart starts to pound because we see the car. And because we realize our heart is pounding because of the car, that's the physiological state, we can now say, hey, I'm afraid. And then the emotion becomes consciously aware in our conscious awareness. Next is the Cannon-Bard theory of emotion. Cannon-Bard states that emotion-arousing stimuli is simultaneously triggered by physiological response and subjective experience of emotion. Remember, your subjective experience is your perception. All right? So, if you see an oncoming car, this is the stimuli. The oncoming car, your heart will begin to pound. That's the physical arousal, with the simultaneous perception of fear. If I can do this correctly. With the simultaneous emotion. So the Cannon-Bard theory states that when we have an emotion-arousing stimuli, then we will experience physical arousal and emotional arousal simultaneously. And they will be brought to our conscious awareness simultaneously. The next and last theory of emotional processing is the Schachter two-factor theory of emotion. The Schachter two-factor requires what's called a cognitive label. But first, we will simultaneously, consciously process our physiological arousal, such as sweaty palms, increased heart rate, rapid breathing, so the sympathetic nervous state, and then it will be simultaneously processed with a cognitive label, where we attribute the source of arousal to a particular cause. Once that happens, then we experience emotion. So for example, if you're walking down the hallway, actually never mind, I have some examples coming up. Let's see if you can name them. Alright, next, let's see if you can identify the theory based on the situation. You see a man by a parked car. He looks pretty shady. You begin to tremble. You realize that your trembling is caused by fear. You are afraid. What theory is this? The Schachter two-factor, because of the cognitive label. What's this one? You see a man by a parked car. You are trembling and afraid simultaneously. This is the Cannon-Bard theory. What about this one? You see a man in a parked, shadowy car area, you begin to tremble and run away, and because of that physical arousal, you realize, oh man, I'm afraid. This is the James Lange theory. Now, these theories can be applicable in different situations throughout different cultures. Speaking of culture, some expressions of emotions are culturally universal. If you smile, no matter where you are, whether you're in China, you're in Argentina, Canada, if you smile, that is universally recognized as someone who is happy. If you frown or scruff your face, then it's universally perceived that you're either upset or angry in some way. And because of this, psychologists have concluded that all humans in our species have basic emotions such as fear, surprise, anger, sadness, happiness, disgust, and contempt. Some of these are the incentives that we are born with that are innate with us as well. Now, I don't know what's going on with the software, and I apologize, but happiness is, researchers have found, that happy people tend to have high self-esteem, be optimistic, outgoing, and agreeable, have close friendships or a satisfying marriage, have work and leisure that engage their skills, have a meaningful religious faith, and sleep well and exercise. However, researchers have also found that happiness seems not much related to other factors. Happiness doesn't relate to age, gender, education level, parenthood, physical attractiveness, for example. This is a graph that shows us how wealth relates to happiness. As you can tell, it looks like wealth and happiness are loosely, positively correlated, but not always. If you'll see here, Hungary has a much lower GDP per capita than Japan. However, Japan is less happy than Hungary on average. However, you can see a slight incline in the number, or in the ratio. This graph is another great example of how income, personal income, doesn't dictate happiness. Just because you make a certain amount of money doesn't mean you're going to be very happy. All right? With more money comes more and different problems. With less money comes, again, other unique problems for that socioeconomic status. So happiness is not directly related to income. In fact, it's not true at all, as we see here on this graph. So if universal facial expressions are recognized and can communicate certain emotions, what about the pronunciations of words? We just finished discussing linguistic relativity 2 units ago. So how does pronouncing words impact our own emotion? Well, this question is picked up by the facial feedback hypothesis. And this is the hypothesis that changes in facial expressions can produce corresponding changes in emotions. This research was conducted by Dr. Zajunk et al., which means Zajunk and colleagues, and he had subjects repeat vowel sounds. He making some sounds like ah, e, which caused smiling and elevated mood. And then he had some subjects pronounce oo and ah and which caused frowning. And he noticed that there's a direct correlation between these tones and lower moods. It's a pretty interesting concept, the facial feedback hypothesis. Think about certain languages and cultures. Are certain languages who have more higher pitched tones like E, I, which force you to make a smile? Are those cultures and the people who speak that language typically more happy than other people who speak more and ah type tones? What do you think? We'll talk about it in class.